All the talk the last month or so has been about rookies for the Seahawks, but there's some really exciting veteran players returning that'll be looking to bounce back in year one under Mike Macdonald. Which players have the best chance to rebound in 2024? Nick Lee and I are going to be breaking it all down on our latest Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Gig Harbor, Washington, or in Honduras. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're now more than halfway through OTAs, which means training camp is getting closer. We're going to be looking at some veteran rebound candidates in 2024. They'll be looking to bounce back from maybe somewhat disappointing 2023 seasons. We'll be ranking our top 5 undrafted free agents with the best chance to make Seattle's roster come August. And we're going to play a spirited game of What's the Word here on a loaded Blue Friday episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As is the case every year, there's been plenty of discussion about Byron Murphy II and Tyrese Knight and all of the 8 incoming draft picks for the Seahawks over the past month. That's one of the exciting things when you get into the last phase of the offseason program. But in reality, for the Seattle Seahawks to be able to get back to the postseason and make any noise in January, they're, of course, going to need several of their veterans to pick their games up in year one of the Mike Macdonald era. And there's plenty of guys that we could discuss in this segment. But, Nick, we're going to be looking at one offensive and one defensive player apiece that we think has a great chance to rebound in 2024, have a strong bounce back season. And we're going to start the conversation on the offensive side of the ball because this was an offense that dropped from 9th in scoring to 17th last year, despite all of the skill player talent. The fact that Geno Smith finished strong, he had his struggles early in the season. The offense didn't live up to the hype. We thought that was a top 5 caliber offense, didn't get close to being that level last year. When you look at this offense, as far as returning players, who is the player that jumps out to you with the best chance for a bounce back 2024 season?
Well, I know there's only so many times you can beat a stone before you realize it's not going to give you water, but I'm going to keep beating it, and that's going to be Noah Fant. I do think there's some water still in that stone, so to speak. And, he hasn't even eclipsed 500 yards in 2 years in either season for the Seahawks, which is very surprising. He's got all the ideal size and athleticism you want in a tight end. He can be weaponized in the red zone, which last year inexplicably he was held touchdownless, which still boggles my mind a little bit. He become one of their bigger red zone targets. I know, and we saw a Ryan Grubb offense with a guy that we might discuss later, a tight end for Washington last year that kind of stood out. And tight ends can be featured in an offense quite like that. So I'm not going to say he's going to go all pro on us, but I could easily see him going from kind of bumped up in the high 400 yards. I could see him getting 600, 700, 800 yards, and more than 0 touchdowns would be great. We'll go with maybe 3 or 4, but I think that would be a nice bounce back for Noah Fant. I think that we were all surprised when he came back, when he re-signed with the Seahawks. And I think part of that is because I think he also maybe sees this bounce back potential.
Yeah, he was sold on this offense with Ryan Grubb. And I mentioned this yesterday on the show with Rob. I mean, we're talking about a guy that in his career, almost 50% of his catches in the red zone have been touchdowns, but he hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities. That is on the offensive coordinator. You need to find ways to scheme an athletic tight end like this that clearly has been efficient scoring touchdowns, but you had 2 targets for him in the red zone last year. I'm not blaming Geno Smith for that. I'm blaming the play caller. Get your tight ends in a position where you can maximize them. This isn't going to be the sexy pick necessarily. Seattle's skill players, as far as I'm concerned, were fine last year. You still got big seasons from DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett almost got to 1,000 receiving yards. Jackson Smith and Jigba finished strong. Ken Walker III, despite the O-line in front of him, almost got to 1,000 rushing yards. Charbonnet had his moments. So I'm looking at that O-line, and Charles Cross, I don't think he was terrible last year. I'm not going to sit here and say that he was a bottom third tackle in the NFL. I don't think he was that bad, but 95.4% pass blocking efficiency, dropped 0.5% from the year before, which quite frankly, being under 96 is not good. As a rookie, it's fine, but in year 2, that is not good enough for a former top 10 pick. You've got a really good young offensive line coach in Scott Huff now that's on board that is doing a lot of technical stuff with these guys. I think that Charles Cross, this is the year. If you're going to break out, this is the year to do it. And man, how much would that help this offense if he could ascend to even a top 15 left tackle in the NFL? If he becomes a top 10 in the NFL and really improves his pass protection numbers, gets after the run game, that by itself could make this a much more dangerous offense, regardless of the scheme situation, because they just had their O-line limitations that really hurt this offense last year. So Charles Cross, to me, is a good bounce back candidate. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, you and I were kind of jockeying for 2 names. I feel like there's 2 returning players that really fit this bill, and there was more turnover on defense too. So that limited the number of guys we could discuss here. But I know there's one player in particular that could have a position change that you have eyed that you think has a chance to really unpack his potential this year.
Yeah, I think this is one of the fairly obvious ones for this kind of category, this kind of discussion. That's Dre'Mont Jones. Looking at the Seahawks defensive line, it's bounced back in a huge way, the whole unit in the last year, 18 months or so. And to think of all the talent they've brought in, all the talent they have returning, and Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, and all those guys, you're trying to Wosu coming back. If we could somehow get another a breakout or bounce back season from Dre'Mont Jones on top of that, holy smokes, that would be incredible. And there's rumblings of him probably assuming more of an edge, traditional edge role versus down and dirty 5-tech defensive end. His snaps were pretty split in those 2 last year, and it did seem like he had a bit more success as a true edge. And I think Mike McDonald will be able to maximize that ability. He's got tons of ability. I mean, 6.5 sacks in 2022, did drop to 4.5 last year, but we're talking, 11 sacks in the last 2 years. And I think that he could easily, go over 4.5 and maybe get to that 6.5. Even if he gets back to that 6.5 sack range he had in 2022, I think that would be plenty with the other talent the Seahawks have. And some of the other numbers too, like, the run defense and things like that. So Dre'Mont Jones is certainly a guy that as soon as we started talking about, guys that can break, returning Seahawk players that are due for a breakout or could benefit from this coaching/scheme change, Dre'Mont Jones, I think, was number 1 on my list.
Yeah, Dre'Mont Jones is number 2 on my list because, Dre'Mont Jones has been a really good player, but he hasn't been an all-pro caliber player. 2 years ago, as a rookie, Reek Woolen was an all-pro caliber player, tied for the league lead in interceptions, had a bunch of pass breakups, was a finalist for Defensive Rookie of the Year, made the Pro Bowl, and then last season, we saw all the missed tackles last year. It was atrocious against the run. He was the worst graded run defender of qualified corners in the NFL by Pro Football Focus. And I think his shoulder injury he was playing through had a lot to do with that. I think that he was limited physically. And that was one of the reasons Pete Carroll actually benched him against the Eagles late in the season. And Mike Jackson started in that game. And so it was a little bit of a fall from grace. But here's the reason that I have a lot of optimism with Reek Woolen. It isn't just Mike McDonald and the scheme and the improved defensive line, and I think is going to speed quarterbacks up a little bit. But when you look deeper into the stats, Nick, and this is not something a lot of people have talked about, but yes, the interceptions were not there. Reek Woolen only had 2 of them last year. But he had only 1 fewer pass breakups than last year, or his rookie year. He had 10 his rookie year, 9 last season. He had one of the highest forced incompletion rates among corners in the league, top 10 in that area. And the other thing is he dropped 3 interceptions. So he had positioning in a lot of different instances where he could have got picks and he just failed to capitalize. If those numbers stay the same and he's able to turn those dropped interceptions into finished interceptions, then he's right back to where he was his rookie season. He's healthy. His shoulder's not bugging him anymore. He's going to be expected to go up and make the tackles in the run game. And I think he proved his rookie year that he's capable of doing that. So I just look at his numbers last year. I don't think in coverage that he played poor football. I think there's some numbers that actually were better. He gave up fewer touchdowns last year. It's just the interceptions and the missed tackles. Those 2 numbers. You want to see more picks, more turnovers, and you want to see him cut down on those missed tackles and be a more consistent defender against the run. But I believe he can do that, and having Devin Witherspoon there across from you is certainly going to help with that pass rush as well. So I'm thinking Reek Woolen has a great chance to really bounce back this year in this scheme. Up next, we're going to swing over to the undrafted free agents. Which players have the best chance of making the team? And sometimes it isn't the best undrafted free agents, it's the position group that you're in. We're going to be taking a look at our top 5 players with the best chance to make the 53 coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether it's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. If you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has every type of driver covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay's Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time and your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We're now midway through OTAs. We've had 2 open practices, so we've had our first extended opportunity getting to look at some of these undrafted rookies for the Seattle Seahawks. And we know the history under John Schneider and with Pete Carroll at the helm all these years. Now you got Mike McDonald. He's emphasizing these undrafted players. Well, I mean, Baltimore, where he came from, Baltimore's had a lot of success with undrafted players as well. So there's some carryover there. And looking at this year's undrafted crop, we had our good friend Thor Nystrom of Fantasy Pros on here earlier this month, and he had Seattle with the number 4 ranked undrafted class in his rankings. So there's plenty of talent in this group. But when you're looking, Nick, at the players with the best chance to make a football team in undrafted ranks, it isn't always about who the best player is, because the position group that you land in and the veterans that are returning to that position, ultimately that has the most bearing most of the time on which guys have the real chance to make the team. So I'm sure that's something that's going to be weighing into both our rankings here as we talk about our top 5 undrafted rookies with the best chance to make the Seahawks roster in 2024.
Absolutely. I looked at, depth and health. Those are the 2, areas in the Seahawks roster where some undrafted guys could take advantage. And that immediately came out to me. I mean, it's been a topic of discussion for over a week now with the tackle situation. My number 5 for possibly going to make it is Garrett Greenfield, the tackle from South Dakota State. Given the unknown health of Abe Lucas, I know Greenfield was much more of the anchor left tackle at South Dakota State rather than he didn't have a lot of experience on the right side, but seems like he has the athleticism and the ability to switch to the right if necessary. He's hailed for his pass protection. So guys like Stone Forsythe, maybe Mike Jarrell, I mean, they shouldn't get too comfortable seeing, Garrett Greenfield in the rearview mirror. I think that he's got some talent. He's got the experience at that. He played at a high level at South Dakota State, about as high as you can play at the FCS level. So don't just dismiss that because he played in the FCS. He played at a really high level for a really talented team. And so I'm going to go with him, number 5, for having the best chance to make it, given the unknown health status of Abe Lucas, and really just we talked about last week, the status of the depth chart at tackles better than it was last year, but you could certainly use more.
Yeah, Greenfield actually played more than 1,000 snaps at right tackle at South Dakota State. So he actually has that swing tackle flexibility. I have him as my honorable mention here because I think the addition of George Fant and the fact that Stone Forsythe's still there, they like Mike Jarrell, who they picked in the 6th round. It is still going to be an uphill climb for him to make this team. And I'm still holding out hope Abe Lucas will be ready for week 1. Maybe he's not ready for training camp, but we shall see. Coming in at number 5 for me, this is going to surprise people because of the position group that he's in. And I'm like you, I would have Hayden Hatton higher on this group if it wasn't for the position group he's playing in. But I've been really impressed for what I've seen from the Idaho receiver to open OTAs. I mentioned on yesterday's show, he's the guy that I keep gravitating to that I didn't think I was going to be watching closely, but he's 6'2". He's got really soft hands, had 87 catches per season the last 2 years at Idaho and had 1 drop combined in the last 2 years. He's got really good hands. He is a slick route runner. I think he's a slightly more athletic player than Jake Bobo, and his ability to high point the football is exciting. If he can play special teams, that's going to be the key. Is he going to be a guy that can give you snaps on special teams? If he can, I've seen enough to suggest to me Hayden Hatton could make life very interesting for players like Drake Young, Laviska Shenault, D. Eskridge. You all better be looking at that rearview mirror because Hayden Hatton is that undrafted rookie this year that could be gunning for a roster spot. I'm going to stay on the defensive side of the football at number 4. Nelson Caesar, another player that I think the position he's playing, because Dre'Mont Jones now is going to be playing off edge more often, I think it's going to make it a little trickier for an undrafted edge guy to make this football team. And yet at the same time, he's got a great motor. You saw pass rushing and run defense ability at Houston on his tape. You love the relentless play style. And oh, by the way, Darrell Taylor's got much to prove here to this new coaching staff, and he's only guaranteed $20,000 this year in his restructured contract. So if Nelson Caesar comes in and ends up taking snaps from him, which is very possible, if that happens, then Darrell Taylor might be the one that is getting a pink slip, and Nelson Caesar could be making this football team.
Yeah, we're kind of in congruency there. Nelson Caesar was number 4 for me as well. First team All Big 12. He put up some good numbers at Houston, which, yeah, you think Houston, now they were playing Big 12 football now. They were playing some good competition last year, and he stood out. And so that's number 4 for me. Number 3, I'm going to go Jack Westover, the tight end out of UW. I think the depth chart might be a little bit against him with, of course, Farrell Brown is one that might fit that mold. AJ Barner, I think, is another type of maybe do everything tight end. You got Brady Russell and Tyler Mabry still in there. And also, but Jack Westover is that kind of do everything. He's the latest model in the Will Dissly factory. He's got some of that ability to block, of course. I mean, if you didn't know how to block at UW, you didn't play. I mean, that's just kind of how it was. So he's got, and obviously there's rapport there with Ryan Grubb. Obviously he felt very highly about Westover since they're now together in the pros, at least temporarily. So I could see him making a case. The depth chart does concern me a little bit, but just some of the ability he can have, and the Seahawks, at least with the old system, did like to have a lot of tight ends. But I can see him shining above 2 or 3 of those guys and being towards the back end of the depth chart. Maybe practice squad guy. He gets some action late with injuries, but watch out for Jack Westover.
I've got Easton Gibbs at number 3. I'm staying on defense, and this is the position where if you're an undrafted rookie, you got to like your chances of making this football team, especially with the news that we got yesterday from Mike McDonald that Jerome Baker isn't going to be ready till at least the start of training camp, coming off a wrist injury, and he's dealing with some lower body stuff too. So that was not necessarily an encouraging update, but they're hoping they can get him back in time for training camp. But that position is in such flux right now because right now John Radigan and Patrick O'Connell have been getting the reps with the ones. If you get to week 1 and those are your starters, probably not an ideal situation. But you look at what Easton Gibbs did the last 3 years at Wyoming, which, by the way, is kind of a linebacker factory. They've been kicking out a lot of NFL linebackers. Easton Gibbs might be undersized at 6 foot, 232, but the guy just has a nose for the football. He finds it. He finishes tackles, low missed tackle rate, over 300 combined tackles last 3 years, 7 sacks, so he can blitz. There's some effectiveness there. We know how much Mike McDonald likes that from his linebackers, and he's a former safety, so I think there's some coverage ability there that can still be unlocked. This is a position that is prime. It's ripe for an undrafted rookie to be able to step in and win a roster spot. I don't know if Easton Gibbs gets it done because there's some other young players the Seahawks like there, but I could easily see him, if he can shine on special teams and he dominates an exhibition play, he could make this football team. Going over to the backfield at number 2, of course, I've got to mention a Boise State running back, but it's not because he played at Boise State. It's because George Halani is a pretty darn good football player when he's healthy. And watching the last few OTAs that have been open here, another guy that's got a chiseled lower body. He doesn't miss leg day. This is a guy that drives through tackles, creates a lot of yards after contact. And Seattle, after their top 2 or 3 backs, yes, they're loaded at the top, but this is a group you like to have 4 running backs because of the injury attrition of that position. Halani had almost 90 catches in college, so he's got soft hands. There's some pass protection ability. He's been inconsistent, but you would at least see some good tape if you can get more consistency there. Hey, if I'm Kenny McIntosh, don't just think you're settled into the third down back. George Halani has the goods to be able to do that as long as he can stay healthy, and I think he can make that a very interesting competition at running back.
Yeah, going back to Easton Gibbs, he was definitely my my honorable mention. If you looked at just if I were ranking positions that were ripe for an upset of an undrafted free agent stepping up, linebacker I think would be number one. Especially with the injury news, I am just so out on the linebacker position right now as far as hype. I'm really concerned about that. My number two is going to be D. Williams. I really like D. Williams, especially I wrote an article about how the kickoff, the new kickoff format could really benefit a guy like D. Williams, who did some great things in college. Kind of a jitterbug. He's not exactly, your top end tier speed, but he's got the suddenness, the quickness, the ball skills necessary. I think that if he does carve out a role on this team, it is as a return specialist. I'm not going to sit here and discuss about how he deserves to be, have a starting spot in the starting 22. But as far as at least going from that receiver to return specialist, I know the receiver room's a bit deep, but as a returner, I absolutely think he could be. I think he's probably right now on the roster, maybe one of their top three options as far as return specialists. But so I'm going to go him at number two, and for number one, I'm going to go George Holani. I think George Holani, just with the depth chart, running back, the teams usually do go through 3, 4, 5 running backs in a year, and right now your running backs Walker, Charbonnet, McIntosh, then Holani's pretty much the next guy. And yeah, you're right. McIntosh is right there. Looking in his rearview mirror for Holani. So the pass blocking could use some improvement, but the pass game or the catching ability could be up there. That'd be an exciting development too. So Holani is my number one.
My number one is Jack Westover, and I know the tight end depth chart is not ideal, but listen, I'm just saying this based off what I'm seeing at OTAs. Last year, we got to see Geno Smith build a connection with Jake Bobo during OTAs. Now, the issue here is, of course, Jackson Smith and Jigba's catching almost everything from Geno Smith right now, but there's been several times that he has thrown the ball to Jack Westover, who has gotten some opportunities with the first team. Some it's because Barner's not practicing right now, but Ryan Grubb is giving him opportunities to play with the starting quarterback and some of the starting receivers. He's getting plenty of reps there. That familiarity with the offense, the fact that he is an underrated move blocker, not a guy that's going to be in line a lot, but he also has previous special teams experience. Didn't do it much the last couple of years, but he can play there. The guy's an athlete. You can put him on special teams. And I actually think he'd be an interesting blocker to have on the new kickoff too, because of his mobility and the physicality he plays with. I think 4 tight ends making this roster has a really good chance to happen because Barner and Westover both have special teams value and they offer different games. And I just think this is a guy the Seahawks are going to want to keep around. So I've got Westover number one. I just see him being a guy Geno Smith's going to be pounding the table for too, not just because he knows the offense, but because he's got really trustworthy hands and he really likes having him in this offense. When we come back, we're going to play What's the Word, one of our favorite games here on Blue Friday, with a number of Seahawks and NFL topics. Don't go away. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for listening in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the podcast. As we do each and every Friday, it's game day, and we're going to be bringing back, dusting off one of our favorites, What's the Word? And for those that haven't seen this game here on Locked On Seahawks, what we do, we've got a number of phrases with fill in the blanks, and we got to come up with the word that best fills in that blank. It's one of our favorite games. So without further ado, Nick, let's get to our first one. Watching Byron Murphy II fly off the ball on the practice field brings blank feelings.
Is an acronym one word? Is NSFW feelings a thing? Can that be? No, for fear of being clipped by, the powers that be, I won't say NSFW things, but we'll say tingly feelings because, oh my gosh, talk about something that I personally have waited a long time with the Seahawks is a guy like that on the defensive line. So yes, it makes me feel all tingly inside let's just say that.
I'm going to go with unnatural because there are like 4 or 5 human beings on this planet at that size that can move like that. And that's the type of athlete we're talking about here. You can't see a lot in OTAs, but sometimes you can just see, like last year with Devin Witherspoon, it was evident in OTAs. Like this dude, even a little bit he was able to do. He had some hamstring stuff he was dealing with, but when we got to see him out in the field, you could just tell, okay, that guy's a top 5 pick. You can see the talent. Byron Murphy, you can see the first round. You can see the top defensive player athleticism at 297 to 300 pounds. The guy just has unnatural movement abilities, and I have unnatural feelings when I watch that. It's really exciting. Our second one here, Jackson Smith-Njigba qualifies as a blank fit in Ryan Grubb's offense.
Oh, this one's going to be kind of a boring one, but I'm just excited. It's exciting. I could see, talk about breakout guys. Imagine, Tyler Lockett gets his, 800 to 1,000 yards, hopefully towards the 1,000 yards. DK Metcalf gets his 1,000 yards. If Jackson Smith-Njigba can really reach that 800, 900,000 yard kind of area, I mean, that's just straight up exciting. That is something that the Seahawks just really haven't had. That kind of depth and that kind of just embarrassment of riches at wide receiver would just be really exciting. I really tried to find a better word, but I'm just really excited to see how that goes.
I'm saying fantabulous. This is a fantabulous.
Oh, we're doing that now. Okay.
Bit, because I've been talking about this since the day Ryan Grubb officially took the job. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the first name that popped in my mind, thinking that's the biggest beneficiary of this addition to the coaching staff. Because you look at what Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan did at Washington, doing so much damage, both downfield and attacking outside of the numbers and on crossing routes. Just those guys were dominant at times in that offense. And of course, you had Rome Odunze as well. That was another embarrassment of riches. But Jackson Smith-Njigba is a better player than those two. No offense to McMillan and Polk, who are going to be solid NFL receivers. But Jackson Smith-Njigba is on another level. And I just think his skill set in this offense, we're seeing some, I know it's OTAs, take it with a grain of salt, but like this dude is poised to have a breakout season. I just think that this is a fantabulous fit, putting him in Ryan Grubb's offense. Number 3, it's a blank that players such as Leonard Williams and Dre'Mont Jones haven't been participating in OTAs with a new defense to learn.
I kind of I cheated a little bit. I cut off the A. It's inconsequential. It's inconsequential that players such as those two are participating in OTAs. We're going to get to training camp and we're going to forget about this. Like this is just going to be something that kind of just gets forgotten. With Leonard Williams got a new deal. Dre'Mont Jones obviously probably is of the two would probably we prefer to be there. But I think once you start training camp and get into the more of the true preseason, this will be fairly inconsequential.
I love to make up words for this segment. This is nothing burgical. This is a nothing burger. It is not a big deal. If we were talking about a second-year player, and there's a few guys we maybe could put on this, but if you're talking about a second-year player that's just trying to stay on the roster, if you're not showing up for these practices, that's bad. You know that Dre'Mont Jones and Leonard Williams are getting their work in away from the field. They'll be here for mandatory minicamp. They're going to be ready to go. These guys are seasoned vets. They know what they're doing. Mike McDonald's not going to complain about this. I'm sure he's had communication. I'm sure the coaches have had communication with these guys. Hey, this is what we want you to work on. And defensive line is going to be an easier thing to learn all this stuff than what some of the complex things in the secondary are going to be in this defense. That's just the reality. So to me, this is nothing burger is or whatever. I'm changing my own made up word. But next one here, the NFL's new kickoff rules will blank the game as we know it in 2024.
I'm going to go for a fun word. The NFL's new kickoff rules will revivify the game as we know it in 2024, meaning it'll give new life or vigor to. Well, I don't see it's not going to be completely, game changing where it completely alters the environment and ecosystem of football as we know it, but it's going to give a little more life. Maybe I won't go grab that bag of the bag of munchies out of the cupboard during kickoffs. And maybe I'll try to make it back to my couch after commercials to see the kickoff or before the kickoff, I should say. Or before the commercials, I should say. I'll hold it a little longer in the bathroom for the kickoff because it's going to revivify the game. I really do. I'm really excited to see how this plays out.
The NFL's new kickoff rules, they're going to nostalgify the game as we know it in 2024 because it really has become nostalgia thinking about guys like Dante Hall, even Devin Hester. I mean, I know it hasn't been that long since he played, but like the game has this has really become a play that has become, as you mentioned, it's like a punt. I'm just going to go chill out in the bathroom or go get something to eat or whatever, because 95% of the time the kicks are sailing out of the end zone anyway. But these new rules are going to promote returns, and that fires me up. It's some nostalgia, like, hey, this might actually be a play that's meaningful. It used to be one of the most exciting plays in the game, and I'm hoping this gets it back to that point, and we get some of those nostalgic feelings where we see Devin Hester's and Dante Hall start making some big plays in the kick return game. Our next one here, dropping OTAs and extending training camp presents a blank idea moving forward.
I'm going to go, it'll present a salutary moving forward, which means producing good effects or being beneficial. Salutary. It is going to have salutary effects because, OTAs, I know it's exciting because, it's May. We're desperate for football. I know there's not a lot of people out there like me. I'm a year-round sports fan. I'm all in on baseball right now. We got hockey playoffs, NBA playoffs, and I love golf. Golf's pretty much year-round. I'm all in on that stuff. So, but for folks who are just football driven, it's a long off season, and having OTAs, kind of having this fun conversation about not real football, but things happening right now that could be newsworthy, coming out of the VMAC. I know that's exciting, but I'm going to go overall. I think that would be a better idea. I think because when I think baseball, guys don't come into the facility in like December and January for a couple weeks to play home run derby or something. It's just there's ways to go about it where you don't need that. The rookie mini camp I think is important for sure with getting those draft picks in there in the building, but because I feel like a lot of nothing burgers come out of OTAs, so it'll be a salutary idea. I think it'll be beneficial moving forward.
You and I are on far different tangents here, my friend. I'm going to say it's a crack-brained idea, and here's my reasonings behind it. I'm basing some of this on conversations I've had behind the scenes with a few players here in the last couple of days. The NFLPA is reportedly pushing for this, but I have not had a player I have talked to that is in favor of this, because the extended training camp, think about this, reporting end of June potentially to start training camp and slowly progress forward. And I have a lot of players saying, wait a second, you're telling me I have to show up in late June and that's going to be mandatory for training camp? They would much rather have this set up where it's voluntary. Show up if you want to. We can get some work in, and then we get that month break between. I know there's going to be some players out there that maybe like that longer off season, but the idea of having training camp open end of June, early July, I think that would have some players saying, wait a second, isn't that when it's really supposed to be starting to get hot? Like, I don't know if I want to be doing this. So I think it's a crack-brained idea. Our last one, real quick, a fun one. Mixing silver helmets with navy jerseys on game day would be blank.
Well, I'm picturing the silver helmets with the throwback logo, with the throwback colors, and there's a section like BYU is an example. Some folks talk about crackbait ideas. Some folks want to mix Navy and Royal BYU stuff. Again, no. This would be a cataclysmic idea. This would be which means violently destructive. That is what cataclysmic means per Webster. Mixing silver helmets and Navy jersey. I saw your picture of Sam Howell in the throwbacks with the Navy helmet. My brain went into a pretzel. Like, whoa, what's going on?
And Tyler Lockett had the silver helmet with the Navy jersey.
I can't do it. Now, if you want to make the silver helmet with the current Navy logo, fine. But having the throwback silver helmet logo with the Navy jersey or vice versa, that would be cataclysmic, Corbin.
Yeah, I kind of cheated here because I was thinking about the silver helmet with the current logo and maybe those that motif that they have on the helmet, but just have it in silver. And I started thinking about this, and that's aesthetification. I'm just making up George Bush's.
Yeah, George Bush. Where
yeah, it's all about aesthetification right now. No, I'm looking at this as aesthetic perfection. If you have silver helmets with the current logo, if it's the throwback with the Navy, yeah, I'm with you. That would look horrendous.
You would go nuclear. I would go nuclear.
I was visioning this when Tyler Lockett was modeling that yesterday. I'm like, God, if that had the current logo on it with the Navy jerseys and a Navy face mask instead of the royal blue, that would be perfection right there. So
Agreed.
I would love it. But again, I kind of cheated there because I was considering putting that new logo on there. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at Nick Lee 51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, Rob Rang and I'll be recapping the final open OTA session and starting to look forward towards mandatory minicamp, which is coming soon for the Seahawks. Enjoy your weekend, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.